Hello students! I am excited to be starting a brand new section with you, Chapter 5.3, which is about one of our most important macromolecules, DNA. Understanding what DNA is and how it works is one of the most important foundational concepts for understanding all of the rest of biology. So listen up, engage your brains, and ask good questions in class so that you really learn this well. Okay, let's begin by defining DNA, which is an acronym for the actual scientific name of the macromolecule, deoxyribonucleic acid, okay, DNA. Now, you should realize that you've heard the term nucleic acid before. Recall when we learned our categories of organic macromolecules that the main role of nucleic acids in living organisms is to store coded information. Well, as one kind of nucleic acid, DNA has a specific and important job related to storing information because it is the macromolecule that stores the hereditary information that determines an organism's traits. As you may know, the term hereditary, this term here, means passed down from one generation to the next. Thus, you got your DNA from your parents, and you will pass some of your DNA on to your children. Okay, so when we say that DNA has information in it, we mean that DNA is literally a chemical code. And this chemical code contains the instructions needed for an organism's growth and development. Without DNA, our cells would not know what materials to make or how to behave. We will spend the end of this section describing how cells We'll spend the end of the section describing how DNA instructs the cell. But before we get there, we're first going to talk about the structure of DNA. That is, how it looks and how it is put together. Examining the picture at the right, we immediately get the impression that DNA, represented here as twisted strands, so look at all of this, is actually a very long molecule. So if you follow with your eyes, from the top of the picture here, it's showing you it's getting smaller and smaller, but all of this blue, that's all DNA. And if you look all the way to the bottom of the picture, you can see that we're really storing a very long strand of DNA in each cell. So, where in the cell is this DNA stored? It's stored in the cell's nucleus, which you have learned about before. But the question is, how does it all fit? And so I hope that you can see from this picture that the very, very long DNA strand is actually organized into a structure called a chromosome. The chromosomes, which end up looking like the structure there, are actually very long strands of DNA that are wrapped around proteins. And this happens kind of in the same way that thread in a sewing box would be wrapped around a wooden spool. So if we go back to the picture, these orange molecules are proteins. And what is happening is that the DNA is being wrapped around the different proteins. And in this way, we can organize and condense the DNA, and then we can stack each little spool of protein and DNA up together, and then continue to spool it until we eventually get down to this compact organized structure called the chromosome. Okay, a little bit more about DNA structure. When you look at a strand of DNA, it is always shown in the shape of a twisted ladder. This shape is called a double helix. The two sides of the ladder, which are shown here in purple, are made up of sugar phosphate molecules. Now, in this picture, the phosphates are shown in yellow. That's what that P stands for. And then they're rotated or interspersed with other molecules. They're shown as hexagons. Those are the sugars. So it goes on the sides. Each side is built up of a sugar and then a phosphate, and a sugar and a phosphate, sugar, phosphate, and so on. Now, in between the sides of the ladders, there are rungs. The rungs are made up of molecules called nitrogen bases. There are 4 kinds of nitrogen bases in all. Their names are adenine, which is abbreviated with an A, thymine, abbreviated with a T, guanine, abbreviated with a G, and cytosine, abbreviated with a C. Now, if we go back and we look at the picture again, you will notice that the arrangement of nitrogen bases on the rungs of the ladder is not random. Okay, so here are the nitrogen bases arranged in the rungs, but they're not just randomly in there. First, you should notice that there is always a pair that makes up each rung of our double helix. And then second thing you should notice is that adenine always pairs with thymine. And that guanine always pairs up with cytosine. You don't see any other combinations. Adenine is not with cytosine. You don't see any thymine with guanine. It's always the specific pairing, adenine with thymine and guanine with cytosine. As you will see later, this is important for the way that DNA codes and transmits information. Okay, so let's now consider how your DNA helps determine your traits. Your traits are the characteristics that make you, you. Your hair color, your height, how things taste to you, etc. Which of these characteristics you have actually all depends on the specific kinds of proteins that your cells make. For example, if you have blonde, curly hair, your scalp cells are actually making different types of hair proteins than the friend next to you that has straight brown hair. So, how is all of this related to DNA? Well, the instructions for making these proteins are stored in your DNA. The specific places that these instructions are stored in your DNA are called genes. So a gene is a section of DNA that contains instructions for making a specific protein. This is shown on the diagram to the right, where we see the very long DNA molecule. So this whole thing, this whole thing is our long DNA molecule, but it is broken up into individual sections here. So this would be gene 1. This section here would contain completely different instructions. That would be gene 2. And here, this third section is gene 3. And each of these sections has instructions that can be used to make a specific protein. So here, these instructions could make this type of protein, but then if we go down to the next gene, the type of protein that you make from those instructions is going to be different, and so on, down the strand of DNA. In this way, reading the strand of DNA is much like reading recipes in a cookbook. So, if we're going to say that each gene is like a recipe for making a specific protein, what we're really meaning is that each gene has the instructions for determining which amino acids. Again, recall that we've learned in a previous section that proteins are made up of a chain of smaller molecules called amino acids. So when we look at these genes, what we're really looking at are the instructions for deciding which amino acids are going to be used to make up the protein and which order they should go in. We will spend a lot more time in the next 2 lectures explaining how this works, how we can use a gene to determine the exact structure of a protein. Finally, let's remember that each chromosome is very long. So on each chromosome, there are actually hundreds of genes. This is why organisms have the ability to make so many different proteins, which in turn results in a wide variety of traits. Okay, we are done for tonight. Don't forget your Quizmodo, and I will see you tomorrow.